change, but also like it responds to the material that I find in the place. So for example, when responding with the High of the Caribbean, when I'm, for example, in the Dominican Republic, we have a lot of secondhand clothing that comes usually from China, from the States, from Europe. So, just like there, we already have like, this mix of various elements, this mix of like not just clothing that is made to be disposable, but also like clothing that has already been lived by people. So I feel like in a way, we have this waste that is not just this thing that goes, but it's also like an element that has memory, that have alive, that has this series of like experiences that go with it. And then I continue on that circularity, right? So then that was one. Then the other idea that came was the Caribbean piece. So when I think about, for example, the Caribbean is everywhere, it makes me also touch on the importance of the internet, and even like how, for example, social media is allowing us to have a different fluidity of information, constant information, being constantly like seeing so many things all the time. And I feel like in one way or the other, that influences who I am as a person and what I create. And it's not just about like me being in a physical space, but also like, that constant scrolling, stories, even like, when you, for example, choose to, you don't think what the complete that? Yeah, you have like a little bill in social media and Instagram that you press that and then you get that. So I feel like it's also like the way that we choose to consume, right? Like, I feel like right now we also have like a lot of agency in the media, in the visual, in the text that we consume as Caribbean. So I don't know, I feel like it's I see that collage constantly, not just in the material terms, but also like in even in the way that I kind of like think about the formats. Because sometimes, yeah, I use textiles, but then I like to think about textiles as just as we, for example, this was something that I was talking to the students the first day of the workshop. How we have language, right? How we have words, and how words are made by this single black line. And so we have this single black line that makes a letter, and then makes a word, and then makes sentences and go on, and then we have history, culture, like how this one line can like make up so much of we consider as our truth or consider as culture. Especially like I like to see textiles also as this black line. Like it's not just about a piece of clothing or a piece of something that is commercial, but it's also about what are the possibilities of creating, of using textiles or using a thread or the idea of a thread as a way of making sense of the world that we're in.
It's interesting you said that because Anita's work at the National Gallery, it's very really stunning moment where there's a figure that's sort of lying down in a way, and how the thread is sort of pulled out of it. It's almost a kind of erasure that happens in how the thread is pulled out of the figure. I'm going to move to you next. So how do you feel about the idea of the Caribbean artist, let's say, not obviously not just in terms of the geographical sense, but as you've been discussing the more theoretical ephemeral.
Okay. Thank you for describing the work of the Niles. I think if we go back to, you had a dialogue and we start with where we studied. And for me, it's really important because we start off learning this craft. And of course, we learn in the context of religion, very national institution. So we always learn about the Caribbean. And it's around your core. And so I think many years after that moment, when I was in school, I had to learn that just as you know, is writing, if I look at the video, we have infrastructure of what your practices and maybe we cannot build on something. There's not, even though we have in Jamaica, for instance, this is Jamaica, this is Jamaican art history, and we have institutions that affirm that. The sense of the Caribbean is around, and you fit squarely in that. And so I feel like at the beginning there was a more confidence about as a Jamaican artist in the Caribbean. As my practice grew, and of course, right, in traveling connection happened, I started to understand that everybody is seeing themselves in this way, like where this isolation. And then everything else is around. Last night, I was talking to Dina and she was describing a workshop that we did in Red called the History of the Mountain. And for the first time I understood it, she was saying that the Caribbean is really hills and valleys. There's a sea throughout, and we're all just living on like the peaks of the mountain. And I found that really interesting because then most of knocks you down like it. I think it's American, we're just being nuts. But it's interesting because that's why moving image and video appeal to me because I feel like it's something that travels, it's complex, and the economic reality of the artist even from the idea is that you can find something that is not really material. So that definitely appealed as a way to capture a story, capture idea, capture the sense that you are what you're exploring. And just to go back to that video that's in the bio, I feel like that's like the last moment for me as an artist, which is, hey, at the beginning, I'm trying to walk in the footsteps of the whole book. So I like, all these people that are in the national connection. But now it's like, okay, we're all doing this. How can I use the space I have to connect in the way that Joanna is talking about to other people? So if I invite them into the material thing that I'm doing in this video, which is very easy and possible in that sense, how can we collaborate? And totally process that we can collaborate and we can have more of a sense of these islands for these functional moments. Coming together at certain points. It's a very big answer, but I hope we can achieve something.
Completely get what you're saying. Interestingly, the idea of the immaterial keeps coming up, but Camille's work is so it's concretized in a kind of very specific way, even though it's tackling some of the same sort of assembling and the immaterial of what is in the specific material or in that specific material, but she's also combining video with all the things that she's doing. And so I'd like to hear more about how to go about thinking about these problems.
Yeah. So for me, I have been interested in a kind of personal identity, but also regional and Jamaican identity in the work that I do. So a lot of the pieces will have a kind of fragmentary nature, as I mentioned before, or an impermanence. Although I'm working with something like concrete, or before it was plastic bags, I guess you can throw the image before this one. So my practice is very multidisciplinary, so I'll work with painting, I'll work with installation, I'll work with video. And I guess it's a way for me to piece things together, parts of personality. Thinking about race and the aspects of value of human life. So the materials that I use, I found that they have such resonance in the Caribbean. For example, when I was doing the losing obsolescence, which is the works using plastic bags, I was working on that in the US. Originally, I had wanted to use scandal bags, very local, very Dominican, we call them black plastic bags, scandal bags. They don't have them in the country anymore. We use them. But when I was in Massachusetts, I just couldn't find any of these plastics until I visited family in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, and you kind of just see everywhere. It's such a Caribbean thing. And then the concrete blocks too, it's something you'll see in the Caribbean. This type of concrete blocks, basically. So I think there is a very local thing about the materials that I use. And in thinking about this panel, I was also trying to think like, how did I know the Caribbean artists that I know of? Is it just because I came to NMI and did some art history? How did I learn about other artists? And before social media was a thing, I realized that a lot of the artists that I became aware of after being at NMI was through them leaving the Caribbean and doing an exhibition overseas, and then getting access to like a catalog or something. But now that we have social media, using the internet, everybody has that kind of autonomy or like this kind of agency to access anybody. So now I can learn about everybody's personal practice as they're doing it. So the sense of the Caribbean, where I feel like we're a lot closer now because of social media, but at the same time, there's a distance because travel is so difficult. It's easier to probably go to the US than it is to go to Haiti. Like, you guys just came here and like to go to that for Lagos and then come here. Like I've been to Haiti too, and I have to go to Panama and back. And so we're so close, but we're so far away. But as I said, I use social media because brought us together, and then doing initiatives like having you guys here who involved and partner initiatives. These are methods that we can use to kind of thing.
One interesting theme that I'm hearing consistently about not seeing ourselves sort of tied to the land in a sense. But oftentimes, and when you read a lot of external literature articles on Jamaican artists, there's something very interesting happening. They'll put Jamaican born artists still in love, right? And this idea of a kind of almost separating, a kind of displacement, I was found very particular about how people outside of the region write about people within the Caribbean region. It's kind of they're kind of ours. And so that kind of separation, I've always been curious as to how you artists feel about how you're viewed from the outside, as opposed to how you view yourselves from the inside. You understand?
Yeah, I think responding on that, the third, line that I'm gonna go is, says the Caribbean is the word. And I'm related it to the concept, and I wrote, it changes with my own process of identifying myself. So I think that one of the things that I've been trying to, address more and more and be more conscious about is also about writing. When I do something, so I used to be, so my work is very abstract, and formless, and it adapts very easily to different contexts. So then there's also what you're saying, it's like something is, the work when it's seen from the outside, and I'm talking about from any outside wave, right? But then when you are talking about your work, when you're talking about what you're feeling, when you're talking about, when you're writing about, even the words that we are going to be using are less, I think general, are also going to be more specific. And I think there's also something very important about that specificity of, because then that gives each experience the richness of, like, yes, we're all from the Caribbean, but then also, when we come together, we can also like nurture all these different Caribbeans in, from the different ways that we've been.
That's it. Gina, for instance, when you curate that, you clearly think about whose eyes your curation is for. And so sometimes that becomes a very complicated question in and of itself, how do you go about presenting works for specific audiences. So could you talk more about how you go about thinking about this?
Well, many things. One is that I don't necessarily think in the one specific issue explain the exhibition. I am more interested into, the whole one, let's say, and the whole context of the people that will go into the other thing is that I try to avoid always the idea of Caribbean art and Caribbean artists and Caribbean production, because it is an attempt, I think, to put as a whole package a lot of different experience. And I prefer to art made in a specific context, if you need a context, a geographical context. So yes, I always confío, I always trust into the autonomy of the people and the perception, the perceptual system of the human being and the human body to perceive certain things that are really common, especially in the human health. And yes, with my curatorial approach, it is not necessary to translate the art itself into words, let's say. I think the art has their own potential to talk with the people, and the curatorial is only like a way to accompany those processes.
It's interesting that you say that somehow you don't necessarily think about how to package the idea of Caribbean art. And so you're sort of presenting this open project that anybody can respond, right? But sometimes the conception of it, and for instance, I think it's specifically about Asian art, since the 80s, where whatever reason it is, and I think anybody can jump in if talk about this, if they know more about it. But something to me happened in the works of the Asian artists that created a specific way to make Asian art. And I think that might be less about what was happening in the 80s and more about what was happening in where the works were being shaped. And so the audience almost sort of created a standard way in a production. And so that's one of the things I'm always conscious of when people say, what audience is it for? Sometimes the audience creates the streamline in which a lot of artists function. Right? Anika went to Japan, and I'm interested in hearing your experiences in being in this completely different space. How has that affected you, the process?
Definitely affected it. As it would, the market we show number 8, of practice and university. So before, I guess to answer that question, before going to Japan, I have to describe which was I was trained as a painter. And of course, I was starting in video and trying to find my way with this thing I was fascinated with and things that I know to bridge the painting with what I knew was maybe true up to me, which was a visual language that was not tied to an object per se. So it made sense at that point to, I was looking for a program to go to Japan because we all know the anime that we associate with Japan. Of course, when I think about it, I think that's kind of a great choice because I was totally not a fan of anime. Why would I go there? But I don't know, something drove me there because looking at anime, which many of you probably have an experience or a feeling about, is can be described as anything but strange. Like it's a strange art form, but it's also very beautiful because of that strangeness. So that told me, okay, I have to go to see. So I went, and of course, it is that, but the traditional, a country that is totally traditional and built on like this mountain of traditional arts and crafts, which was very different from Jamaica because I knew that there was a narrative of us building this kind of cultural landscape, and it was new. And so they didn't have the anxiety of any kind of building of anything. They were just picking and choosing and just free and confident to, if I want to make an animation in lots of crayons and put it on TV, whereas coming from Jamaica, where you have to almost prove you have this technology, you have this 3D technology, and animation cannot be with the original people. So that was very freeing. And of course, creative comment and coming back because I still talking content with the idea that the art is not simple, it must be technological. So of course it shifted, but the practice now, why I show this and the other one before is that the practice has evolved to this point where I'm going back to the paper and pencil that I remember that struck me of that experience of being in Japan. And what I was attracted to is that craft, that hand craft, intermediate and then solving creative impulse. But now this paper and pencil is printed on pattern and people use it. I don't have to draw. I'm asking them to also add to the artwork. So this is a workshop where there was storytelling. And so that is part of the thing that happened in going outside, going inside, and understanding what you could do more. Can you show them the exhibition?
And in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, please reach out.
Because our responsible for that is beyond this one side. Volunteers in terms of art where you avoid the little carrier. I'm not sure why you want to do that because that's not sure why, but we have million books in the quite a lot of American art. same thing what European art, Chinese art, Japanese art, those things alone, region, geography, as well as aesthetic practice, right? I would think so. So, when I'm looking at one Caribbean, as a category to say, this is where you are located and this is where you work from in terms of the space, but the work is not limited to the journey, sun and the sea. Why would that Caribbean?
Yeah, in this simulation, it is not only the Caribbean category, it is also the category of the American art, the European art, all the categories into the historical, into the art history, let's say. And the way in which we are trying to always fit a lot of experiences in only one level, in only one category. And we tend to develop a certain conceptual framework to approach those practices.
Well, I don't think that's the problem of the art, I think that's the problem of art where what people write and replacing. Spirit that's Caribbean, while we are in America as part of the great Western tradition. But Caribbean has been part of the Southern Sea. I never moved from the Southern Sea. I think it's the art story that damage, not also be afraid of that, but without fear of it. Not also be afraid of it.
Yeah, well, but I work as a curator, when I usually write as well. So I am trying to accompany the practices and putting in relation with other ideas, not necessarily through certain categories, to talk about certain practices. So because of that, I always try to avoid because when I'm the Caribbean from the Dominican Republic, it's very different from the experience that you have here.
Which is it's somewhere I don't know what it is, but it's kind of taking out someone who's studying maybe from again, a critic in Smith. I don't know what he's trying to do how who bring art out of the Caribbean. Is it elsewhere somewhere or is it part of the Americas, part of Western art practices? What is it really? I think it's and the landscape, the political landscape, the political but it's that in the broader context of working like people. But as we were west before the west was west, before the
But I hear what you're saying. There seems to be the debate on authenticity in that. For instance, if you take what is considered authentic Jamaican subject matter, it creates a kind of narrow way into Jamaican art. The same thing for the music and the film by extension. But I think what you're saying is that if you remove the labels, then it sort of frees up the ability to create art. As I think this is where the debate is occurring in that idea.
No, even the labels, it is a strategy that this imagination, this system of making, this word system, has to really become transparent, the things that the human being does. So why we have to insist into the categories and into the label, instead of trying to avoid and going into the opacity, which is a super important concept for the Caribbean experience in itself. Because if you use the searching label, who created the label? Who codified the label?
I would think it is the label per se that defines the concept. Because if you got a couple of them oriented art, you can tell by that art world where each work will appear. It's Chinese art, art like 15th, 17th century. This is the Guatemala, this is the Guatemala, this is the whatever region they have this characteristic geopolitical DNA printed out the world, which you can't come away from. Which one is something else that Jamaica, I think, is that extraordinary case of something. I see where a couple of other regions that don't subscribe to parochial kind of dynastic thing that we sometimes call is poetry and that place of music. I mean, that woman exception that really look at Jamaica dynamism, but also look at the Caribbean as part of with the respect to certain commonality and grow its craft still has that kind of Jamaican identity, but not the kind of craftness that we use to say is what it is. I'm aware of that, but I think the youngest is also aware of that. I think that is about everybody wants
Were you here earlier when I mentioned Haiti? Oh, you did. So one of the things I was saying about Haiti is that I couldn't figure out if.
Oh, yes,
Yeah. Right. So, because sometimes, and I understand your fear in that sometimes the intended audience sometimes drive the narrative. And sometimes if you get rid of the identifiable narrative, then you sort of open up the discussion to everyone. Well, I think what you're saying is that it is also important to have the, as I said, the DNA imprint of the people, not lose that into.
Because I have a relationship to a lot of people who write are writing in the native tongue and not writing in English, even Garcia from Nigeria. They don't know what that is only going to write in Spanish and everybody translate and today book color and translate if they are different languages. Nuno Diaz from Dublin wrote in a kind of national language. But this book being translated in other languages. There's a way in which is speak from your point of view, but it's still universal because Shakespeare is universal, but Shakespeare is particularly British, but it's still universal.
Yeah, I mean, and my point is not about universalism. I don't think about that. I am not impressed at all, and I don't trust even that. And it is a way in which we can go beyond the labels. I mean, for example, there is a show that I curated, and it is happening now in Sao Paulo, and they are a lot of people all over the place. And the show itself collapsed the geographical base. And they are talking in relation to super strong things from different perspectives. And for sure, when you approach the artwork by Nadia Holdings, you will realize that people will be really in relation to the ocean to be able to produce that kind of artwork. Well, then you go and analyze something that is in paintings and then learning. But then, together with Nadia, there is another artist from Los Angeles, from US. And you say like, okay, but these and these kind of, it is like the way in which you can set a particular framework to people approach the artwork. It is nothing to do with going universal or international artists. I don't know what that means. Which is a reaction as well to try to avoid the categories. But my thing is with the categories in itself. I mean, like in good form.
Well, these other days, some search for our identity still going on. There's a sort of basic insecurity with the terminology carried in because we really don't know who we are. I don't think, I mentioned other cultures like European and Chinese and Japanese. I don't think they would have been sitting there and meditating like that. The way that we are today. I think the debate about whether it is Caribbean or not, because of basis in some lack of knowing who we really are. How we live.
And if
We're just coming into the time. Yes, and then we can accept ourselves.
We'll take, Dr. Pay and then Kyle.
Well, just two comments. I mean, I think it's all very well recognized that the prescriptive and confining labels are probably not very useful. But there is also still the fact that the Caribbean itself, less so the Caribbean diaspora, and I'm just using those labels right now, it's a zone of invisibility. And the label can also be a strategy, or strategy to gain visibility, to gain space in a particular continent. Right? So I wouldn't necessarily discourage the idea of a Caribbean cultural sphere lightly, because I think there is tremendous strategic potential. And then the second thing, I was just at a conference the other day where the whole idea of the new art histories and Caribbean was unpacked. And one of the things that we discussed is that the new art histories can, and the new criticism can unpack and challenge labels as much as we want. They're constantly being reinscribed by the market and also by education at particularly at secondary level. Right? So there is you mentioned it, Michelle Rowe pointed out that history is not made by historians, and the same thing by art history. Art history is not just made by art historians, it is negotiated constantly between all these different forces that interpret and reinscribe and challenge and so on. So I think understanding what these forces do is very important for this discussion. Because that is where the hard labels continue to have significant currency. So I think that's really part of the problem. Anyway, just go around.
Thank you for mentioning the idea of the market and consumption, because that ties into the label that is made and how we understand the work and works complex to the geographic area. I wanted to ask, when in terms of stepping outside of those labels, do we narrow it down? Do we narrow our understanding to an individual's artistic practice and let that speak for itself rather than kind of lumping it together under the label of Caribbean? So you speak around Shakespeare, and Shakespeare, is in European English, but he's also universal. But aside from being universal, his work speaks for itself as its own kind of thing. So do we narrow it down to individual artists? But if we narrow it down to individual artists, how do we then, are we all just kind of like ourselves? How do we then kind of come together? And under what label do we come together? And finally, do we create, you mentioned the Caribbean as a label that was made for us. Do we create new labels? Do we create a new label that is not the Caribbean?
We have a lack of conceptual framework, and that will be critical if we are able to continue working and writing and producing any way of knowledge in relation to our realities. Then the necessity of those labels will be disappear. And I think instead of trying to the label and the category beyond the arts, it is because of it's a strategy to become transparent, to capture something. So while we are fighting for freedom, we are in emancipation processes, why we will insist into the labels, which is a strategy to become transparent something. And for becoming transparent, it is co-occasion, I don't know how to translate it in English. But how to, this is
a bowl with a certain amount of liquid, which is water, and then I can work with this bottle in this way, because I became transparent, the bottle. So that is what I think, how we can go beyond the labels. It is first continue into the writing, into the research, into producing knowledge, to approach our realities beyond the conceptual frameworks that we have till now, and also try to avoid the category not only materials, but as a strategy to, yeah, to make something transparent. And I'm here using the concept of transparent in relation to opacity of the sound.
That also makes me think about the connection between something when it's just based in theory. So when we just consume information that we have not lived or have not experienced, how that, how we think about, you know, for example, a text, in a way than when we think about something that we have experienced, that we have lived, that, you know, has been painful or joyful, you know, so that makes me think about, you know, the theory and words, but then also, in contrast with the practice. And so I feel like in the process of practicing being the Caribbean, if we have to word it out, right? I feel like in that process of experiencing the land, experiencing each other, getting to know getting to know other Dominicans, Jamaicans, Martinicans, como que, it is also, as Gina mentioned, that constant process of, I guess, really, I wouldn't say redefining, but I think it would be opening possibilities to, what the Caribbean could be, more than like having this, you know, fixed form consumed as something that I literally just like read or that was written. But yeah, that can be in constant construction as well.
We don't want to present kind of page up. For me, there's this exhibition which I think can speak to both points because it provides an interesting case study, which is I'm an artist, and so in the Caribbean, I don't always get the luxury of just being an artist. If I want to growth and change, I think all of us here experience, everybody in this room. So one of the projects was, okay, once I understood that I'm not just a Jamaican artist, I'm a Caribbean artist, there's that label. Why do I take that label on? Why is it necessary? And what then can we do with that label? What I thought was, okay, the necessity is collectively, we have a voice. Collectively, we have influenced metropolises all over the world. Let's choose one in New York. There is such a huge Caribbean voice in New York, and so many of the artistic institutions who are not able to carry them in any way are a big part of the structure of that metropolis and the big art culture that we know. So one of the things we talked about with Petrina Bakers and several of the other artists was, could we tap into that label and make use of it for how we can do it? Because a lot of the Caribbean shows were based with using people who are based in that metropolis. Of course, there's a link to the Caribbean and an interest, but what would happen if I were to insert my voice coming directly from the Caribbean as an artist working here? And what would happen if I had 8, 6, or 7 other artists coming along with me, saying, this is my version, as you mentioned, one from Haiti, one from Guyana, things that we don't get to understand normally. And what would happen if we put them all in a room? And let's put the label, this is the Caribbean contemporary art show. What happens if pretty much received as the same as any other art show. So that no labeling actually happens because we put it in New York, every show is like the same show. Because it's a show in New York, but it is now something that people can start to begin that. Can you show the other one with the painting, with the painting? Okay, so even that one. I mean, I don't think it's particularly cardio. You know, a painting and a ceramic and another thing, but by the collectivity, there is some kind of notion that occurs, and also like for me that was like a bit of research that was very successful because out of it several other points of action happened. So really, okay, somebody says, oh, I didn't know that that's carrying an item as well. Can you do a fellowship here? And so like the I was able to do another fellowship, discussing this label and artist was under this label. So I don't know, it's a little bit of like wearing a mask and then like, using the mask to achieve what you need. It's a little bit of, we don't really subscribe to the mask or the label, but we use it because can we design it? You know, so that's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a strategy at the time, and they find it low. And we want to be in experience, but the school, we want to do this guy. That is not normal, but title our term, just like artists, always with this, and being an artist. But I like something with the other, in the sense, so we should define ourselves all our practices. Which means like carrier, discard, or artist, discard, and those things is not available. Like what we define is what they want to practice that charity is a certain it has really to a germination in terms of our own development. And I do support that. I strongly term on it. In fact, I discard, I am formally.
When you start with the term.
Yeah, I will use it. I'm giving it.
No?
This one, black of. And checking on the Renaissance of why all different parties, including nickel and now we go and struggle with this still very little in the world, not just in the world, you can see all work but not just visual tradition, but principal tradition. It's clearly people are struggling with the problem. But I started to back those. But practical is where you can formulate things that suit your best in terms of how you define the thing in practice and define where you locate within the thing in practice. So, I cannot to help.
So much value in this discussion. To a point where I think that existing between the two as well. And I think there's something in which young and mentioned about where we belong to each other, you know, how we do it to people. So we can drop that label, you know. I think there's also a sense of fear about being stuck in that label. Somebody labels you a caribbean artist or just like that artist or whatever. You kind of sit there and say, well, what more is there to me? If you take that label away, what else can I do throughout summer, you know? It's something I experience quite a lot in England about once you have this label of black, it's they put in a box of what they're expecting from you, which is usually trauma. It's usually about, you know, they want to see pride or about slavery or whatever. So I get that resistance to labels. I understand that. I also understand that need for a label. Yearning, because it can be quite lonely to be like connect to another artist. I think being an artist can sometimes be quite isolating. And when you know that there's somebody else that it's your experience, you kind of go, obviously friends and stuff and it's together. So I think there's so much value in both perspectives, what we're talking about there. I think it's kind of, for me personally, I see in between that. And can see the need for both aspects. But there's definitely a fear of only being seen as one thing, and I think as humans, we desire to be understood. I think sometimes the worst feeling is being misunderstood by somebody, whether you're dating them or a friendship or a job, and kind of don't want somebody to get the wrong impression of you. And if somebody labels you one thing, you say, no, I'm more than that. Wait, you kind of hear me out, you know? And so I understand that. I think for me, the moment I stopped looking at certain labels on myself, I started to see what more there is to me, what more work can I make. Am I interested in just my blackness as an identity, my Caribbeanness, my Englishness, or can I make work about landscape or about love or about, you know, trees, whatever it might be? So I think there's maybe some value in sitting in between the two arguments as well.
Okay, this is what I said earlier on, in a lot of literature. When you read about how people write about Caribbean artists, they always put Jamaican born. And it's, I always find it a very strange way of saying to the audience, this is one aspect of a thing, but, and so the Jamaican born thing is this additive, something more developed than just, and this is one of the things I ask writers to say Jamaican artists with Thomas and take off the Jamaican part. And then literally such people argue about that because I mean, to your point, I understand why you said that there's value in both things, but I think Jamaica has a very specific set of problems. I did a presentation not so long ago at the National Gallery, and I remember saying to Dexter, easily I export maybe 95% of my work. About 95% of what I make is exported from. Right, and so what are we doing if our aesthetic resources cannot sit in the place they're in? I mean, that in a way is a kind of loss. And so when you think about, for instance, the Benin bronzes or anything like that, that was ripped from the color. This taking from the space and putting in a new space is one aspect of force. But what if I set up the situation in such a way that you export it to yourself? Yeah, and that is also another way of thinking about how does art move through what we call the artwork, and who gets to own what, and where things are made, and why it's labeled. Well, this is from this place to get the authenticity. But we've had this added thing to it now. And so, yeah, I mean, to your point, I really like what you said about it. How am I weighing these two different points?
As a living artist, don't have agency in your art movie. And so we can interrupt and slow, even if it is based on a kind of path or an art career that is pre-described, and not interrupt at points. We need moves, how it moves, which may be what you're saying with that exporting, that 90% export, which is not happening differently.
I guess it could, but the desires are such for so many people who are not in the so-called centers of the art. I don't even know how these centers are made out of Europe. The idea of how we create these labels, and sometimes the people that give us the label sit in these particular centers, and that creates a kind of problem. But I'm not exactly sure how do we interrupt the way in which we move through the artwork. I'm not exactly sure how to address it. It's a complicated thing. Yes. You were saying?
So for me, for example, even the way you can see my biography is written, right? I have Joana Castillo is a connector, in parentheses, artist, textile designer, creative directors. And for me, I feel like the labeling has always been a struggle because, yes, I studied fashion design, but for example, I specialize in materiality, so my final works were actually based on a question more than on the fixed idea of what fashion is. So I explore with, with ethnography, with interview, with making of a book, making of a system, making objects, then this performance. So I had this various element that when I was doing it, it was like, oh, so it's art. So it was, for example, when I finished, I graduated, and people will be like, oh, what you're studying. When I said, oh, fashion designer, I'm a fashion designer, the question was like, oh, so what is the collection? So when it's coming the collection, are you going to be participating in Dominican Fashion Week? So for me, it was also that constant tension between the connotation that a label has and what you're supposed to do when you have this label. So then I was like, okay, I self-proclaimed myself an artist. I was like, okay, now I'm going to be an artist. And then it was also like that same process, like, now I'm doing, for example, I use this, do this reclaiming of clothing, which also connects more on the side of fashion, maybe not from the mass production, but, more towards the side of like slowing down and sustainability. And I feel like from both perspectives, I've always feel like an outsider from the art world and also from the fashion. So, I feel like for me, I've been embracing that in a way, that opacity, that unknown side of the labels. And then, for example, the creative industry side is connect more to the economy of the Dominican Republic. So, for example, when I was in the States, like I was able to like have the studio and like be able to kind of like pay the bills by being a freelance textile designer, right? But then when I came, it was kind of like, I had to understand the workplace from a different perspective, and what connected the field that connected more to that mix of like, fashion design and art was being a creative director in terms of like productions. So, so then I started to also adapt to the place that I was in. So I don't know, what I'm trying to say is that I feel like, yes, I have those three fixed labels that come with my creative label, and I feel like, when I call myself a connector, like a conectora, it speaks more to my soul's desires, to like my own ways of, like, I really enjoy like connecting dots constantly. And so I feel like that is also my way of like weaving and like sewing and it's not only the material side of like making a collage, but even through my stories, even when with meeting people and like, I don't know, I feel like I'm very interested in that also that process of finding like common points, common ground. So on that note, actually, I'm going to show you a piece. You can go to the 1.6, which is called El Nuevo Mundo. I don't actually. 1.6, no, actually go to the 1.1. So for example, this is a series of body of work called The New World. It started in the backyard of a residency that I did in Oaxaca. And because I was trying to get textile waste, I was so used to finding textile waste in the US. But when I was in Oaxaca, like I was not necessarily finding that much because they have this process of weaving that is more, it's more of a slow way of making things. And I remember that when I was looking for waste, they were only giving me like, little amounts of like yarn. And I was like, oh, so if you don't have waste, like what I'm literally working with. So in a way, what I actually did was to start thinking about the materials connected to their culture. So we got listones, which is part of it's part of like their feminine I guess culture in Mexico. And the piece didn't have any name. So when we actually started making this exchange, it was more of feeling the energy of the group, connecting with the land, connecting with the material, and then throughout that process of like, you know, some we had students from the Japón Custodian, they were asking me like, oh, so what should we do with what should we call this? What is this? And I was just like opening the possibilities. I'm like, well, this can be named as you want. And one student, he was the one that said, oh, no, this is going to be the new world. And I was like, yes, okay. And so I don't know, I feel like that was, like, I'm very open to that, to using the presence as a starting point to continue, like, to opening like portals of whatever can continue coming throughout time. So then that was the first iteration. You can go to the second one. So then here you can see, and then I didn't have any plan to do it. It was just very, very intuitive. And then you can go to the next one. So then the second iteration of the Nuevo Mundo happened in upstate New York. And so basically this is a cultural center called Garner's Art Center. It used to be a textile mill, and they had a bunch of rolls of white fabric, and that they were going to be throwing out. So they literally commissioned me. They called me. They were like, "Oh, all this material. Like, what can we do?" And so, you know, it was also this new set of material that was going to be thrown away, a new context. And then I usually like to have questions in the space, so it's not just about the materiality and the connection, but also about generating new ways of thinking and new ways of like exchanging with each other. So, for example, in this one, I had a cardboard that with the question, "What do you want in the new world?" In a way to also think about in terms of words, like, okay, what are the things that we want, that we might be missing from the world right now. And so then you can go to 1.6. Well, yeah, here you can see people connecting, and then the next one is, you can go to it. Yeah, then this was a little bit more advanced. And then you can go to the question, which is the 1.6. Go back. And then yeah. So then, for example, when I did the question there, what do you want in this new world? We had love and understanding, good music, yes, always. Prosperity, understanding, for everyone to understand the term pro-choice, no fossil fuels, adventure, Green New Deal, honesty, empathy, and love. So then, the third iteration of that piece actually happened when I was in the middle of the pandemic, as a story. So now you can go to and for me, I feel like the pandemic was a very critical moment, because my practice has always been about, you know, the in-person, the connection, the seeing each other, the feeling of each other, and not being able to be now was like I feel like I didn't have a practice anymore. Like, okay, if I cannot connect, you know, what I'm supposed to do. So I just did this question, and basically the question was, how do you imagine the new world if that's not normality? And the idea was that people could respond and also send like a reference. So it could be a documentary, it could be a book, and then you can go to it. And then, for example, one response was from culture, and then what I do is that I start to kind of like research about permaculture, but then in a very kind of like digestible way, like short definitions of these words. And I asked the people that suggested to kind of like send a resource so that other people can also like, oh, I'm interested in permaculture. Well, let me look this up. So the next one is, for example, she sent me the permaculture promise. So yeah, I think this piece in itself is one of those bodies of work that kind of deals a lot with the idea of adaptation, flexibility in terms of method and formats, and it takes different, I guess, how do you say that? Yeah, different ways in terms of the context that it is.
Any final question? We were up on time.
Yes, and thank you guys so much for the time. One of the things, with these artist stuff, I want to mention in each time we have them, is that it's a continuous dialogue. We seem to try to make a lot of points, when we are at these kind of events, but it really does to kind of continue the dialogue to see how we are interpreting these things, reinterpreting a lot of things. One of the things with, as it relates to asking the question of, what is art or who is the artist or Caribbean art or these different kind of questions. And Mr. Mentioning that he's a visual philosopher. It's really about us as the art group. I would say art world, but at the moment we're still at the collective right here. How do we continuously ask these questions about this practice we are so involved in, that we give so much time that we think about, that is so much surrounding in our life and that our life surrounds it? How do we continue to understand this thing? So even us as creators, art practitioners, and different people that are invested in art, how do we come to grapple to understand why do we do this thing? So it might be about labels, it might be about you being a Jamaican artist, or you being an artist functioning in Jamaica, and then the same where the market, the curator, the galleries, does impact how art is made, and does impact how one sees themselves as an art, but it's all just a continuous thing that is interwoven into each other, that we must take time to understand if we're going to make our practices worthwhile, whichever practice you may be. So I just like to commend us for even just being here to have this talk, and just to continue the dialogue as we go on.
You want to say? Well, not just.
No, and in relation to your question and what the person, the brochure, you were mentioning, I used to refer to that kind of strategy as an amphibious strategies, and amphibious for myself, it is not the ability to inhabit two different worlds, but also the space in the middle, the ability to space in the transition time. Because currently we are living in transition time. So we are becoming from colonial way of managing the collective power, and then we became independent. In the case of the English-speaking Caribbean, or in the case of the R&D in Cuba, we have a couple of years more going into that process, but the thing is that we are living in transition, and the labels, I think it is not necessarily the way in which we can really inhabit, but it is the amphibious strategy. So when I use certain things and when I should avoid it. And at the same time, it is not a race in which we have to emulate the different, we have to emulate people like myself, think, which try to avoid it.
it is, okay, how I can get into that perspective and also get into the other one, but at the same time, how we can contribute to really build it for myself, that is a really important thing, not only for this part of the world, but for many, the global south, let's say, how we can really build knowledge, departing from our experience to approach the issues that we are having now. So yes, like I think it is how we can continue. It is using and everybody trying to find their own strategy. Let's say.
And I know there are other things that also made me think about the embracing of the both and instead of the either or. So it's not just one or another idea, or one or the other definition of the Caribbean is embracing both ends.
That's a really interesting point that it's being more concrete things that is the space in the middle is already space. It's not to get from one to the other, but a space that you talk about carefully. Okay. Yeah, one more.
I just wanted to say, like, often when we talk, like, we compare ourselves to other very well, developed, cultural landscapes like Asia. Like, I don't think there's any way we can compare at all, because thousands of years, like, there's a monarchy that fuels the cultural study, and we just don't have that. So, in a way, this in between is like maybe the way we have to learn is gonna be our way, and it's gonna be uncomfortable because it's new, it's so new in the world. So that's what I was thinking.
All right. Thank you so very much. I'm very happy to listen to all really, really meaningful points. Thank you so much.
I just want to say, on behalf of the college school, this is really the beginning of getting back to ourselves, being in community with each other like this, and for the thank you, Camille, thank you for this. And I also wanted the opportunity to welcome everyone that's here. And this is a first for me ever. I want to also acknowledge our new board chair, the Dwight Peters. And we demonstrate that in the conversation. So tomorrow we will be having the lecture and from Gina. Okay, wise. Gina will be presenting tomorrow here at the same time. We will not. So we're asking to come out, will be coming out and continue the conversation. This is not, we cannot exhaust the conversation. We're evolving, we're becoming, we're co-creating, and we look forward to coming in studio with Joanna. She's in the textile department and will be doing the rest of the session. And you are welcome to come by for conversations with her, the creative community. You're all welcome. So thank you for being here. All
I think sometimes maybe.
Okay. Oh, yeah.